What I experienced after death was so extraordinary that it completely challenged all my notions of what happens after life. When I was there, I realized that even heaven, as it is often described, I have no doubt that this place was mine, but what I found there had nothing to do with the image of a divine kingdom, as it is usually imagined. It was a world that, at first glance, seemed to have a distant connection to the tales of wonderful and perfect places. After going through this experience, I can confidently assert that many of the ideas circulating about higher realms are actually distortions of reality. What I found had nothing to do with the romanticized and idealized descriptions one hears throughout life. The other side, while fascinating, was very different from what most people envision. These words belong to Arthur Jensen, a renowned geologist who, by a twist of fate, was forced to make a visit to the other world, or more precisely, to a space that many call heaven. Jensen, being a serious and rational scientist, had always ridiculed those who believed in the existence of the soul and the reality of life after death. For him, all religious and esoteric ideas were merely fictions. However, everything changed dramatically in August 1932, when a car accident led him to complete cardiac arrest. This event transported him into a near-death experience that took him beyond, revealing surprising truths. Arthur Jensen describes his experience uniquely. When the doctors declared the time of my death, I felt my soul start to separate from my body. This surprised me because as a soul, I had never imagined anything like that could happen. He recounts that at that moment of separation, he felt a deep fear, as if losing all contact with his body meant final death. However, despite the panic, he found himself unable to stop the ongoing process. Fortunately, nothing tragic happened. Jensen describes the next moment as a gradual distancing from his birth. His soul, which detached from his body, first emerged from the top of his head until he felt completely disconnected from the flesh. Then, at first he hovered above his own body, then above the hospital. Soon, he moved further and further away until the earth completely vanished from his sight. It was then, in a brief instant, that he felt as if his perception was being reset, as if his consciousness was tuning into a new frequency. From that moment on, the world around him became brighter and more intense, more real than anything he had ever known before. His perception continued to expand, and soon he found himself in a vast meadow where, in the distance, two tall mountains stood, their peaks covered in snow and their slopes adorned with indescribable vegetation. Although the distance between him and the mountains appeared to be several dozen kilometers, he could clearly see the flowers growing there. As his metaphysical vision sharpened, Jensen managed to observe the landscape around him more clearly, which filled him with awe and delight. Then he noticed the presence of other people in the distance, who seemed to be playing something. When these people felt his gaze, they stopped and approached him. Each of them looked to be between 20 and 30 years old, and with friendly gestures, they came to greet him as if they recognized him in this new and mysterious world. Arthur Jensen was deeply fascinated by the grace and lightness of the inhabitants of the other world. He found himself enveloped in a serenity and balance that felt completely foreign to the reality he knew. One of the beings he met in this space explained to him that he was indeed in another plane of existence. This being also revealed some of the extraordinary abilities possessed by those who inhabit paradise. For example, in these higher realms, the residents do not experience fatigue. They can read others' thoughts and can instantly transport themselves anywhere. However, it was clarified to him that these abilities only apply to those who reside in paradise. It was at that moment that Arthur Jensen received an important revelation. People in general have a misguided idea of paradise. He thought, like many, that this place would be some sort of refuge where beings could relax, enjoying life without any other responsibility. But what he discovered was very different. Paradise, explained the inhabitant of the other world, is not a place of idleness for those who have spent their earthly lives chasing selfish and trivial pleasures. On the contrary, in the higher spheres, beings are constantly at work, but not in physical or material tasks like on earth. The primary goal is the continuous development of spiritual qualities. Each being has the opportunity to fully develop and manifest their talents and skills, and the process of growth is relentless. There is no room for weightlessness or inaction in paradise. Those who expect it to resemble some sort of celestial complex are completely mistaken. Arthur Jensen, with his scientific perspective, was impressed by the order and wisdom that prevailed in this higher plane of existence. The structure of the other world was indeed far more complex and profound than any human concept of life after death. The idea of a paradise that would satisfy selfish and primitive desires seemed to be an illusion. In contrast, what he observed was a harmonious space where everything was organized in a way that transcended any materialistic understanding. As he immersed himself in this environment, Arthur felt a sensation that left him perplexed. Suddenly, he experienced a familiarity with this place, as if he had visited it before. He described this moment as an epiphany. Looking around with the wonder still fresh in his mind, he realized that this was not just a new space, but his true home. He recalled that in his earthly life, he had always been a visitor, a stranger seeking to return home, to his true dwelling. Furthermore, in this expanded state, Arthur Jensen began to perceive one of the great differences between the material and spiritual world. He realized that unlike earthly life where things disintegrate and mix, in paradise, everything remains intact, eternal. Every element and every being are kept in harmony, unchanging, and preserved by a universal forgiveness. Nothing is destroyed. Everything remains intact in its essence, perpetually restored. This was, for Jensen, one of the great mysteries of the other world. The perfect stability of being. From that moment on, he could no longer hold on to his atheistic beliefs. His view of life and existence had been profoundly transformed. Thus, upon returning to the physical world, Arthur Jensen was no longer the skeptical scientist he had been before the experience. He now possessed a new understanding of life, death, and what lies beyond. Paradise for him had ceased to be a distant abstraction, and had become an unchanging and vibrant reality that he knew to be more true than anything he had believed before. During his stay in paradise, Arthur Jensen couldn't help but ask a question that tormented him. What is God like? To his great surprise, the answer he received was something he had never imagined. None of the inhabitants of this plane of existence had seen God, but not because he did not exist. Rather, his grandeur transcends any capacity for perception, even that of the souls in paradise. God, as revealed to Jensen, is so vast and immense that his presence cannot be perceived visually or physically, but in another way, through a tremendous energy, a super vibration that emanates from him. Arthur Jensen described this energy as an incomparable force, permeating the entire universe. This super vibration, he believed, is the essence that maintains cosmic balance and order, being responsible for sustaining all that exists. It is a reflection of God's love, goodness, and wisdom. Although no one in paradise has seen the Creator in a concrete form, everyone feels His presence in a deep and visceral way. Every soul, without exception, perceives this divine energy, overflowing from everything around it, like a force radiating through every atom of the universe. Arthur Jensen was profoundly moved by this revelation, which allowed him to understand something essential about the relationship between humanity and God. He realized that to truly understand God, one must go beyond mere intellectual or emotional perception. It is necessary to grow sufficiently to grasp this understanding. According to what was shared with him, this is the true purpose of paradise, not a place of rest or idleness, but a space dedicated to the constant improvement of souls. Paradise, therefore, is not a refuge where souls simply indulge in laziness or pleasure. On the contrary, it exists so that each being may perfect themselves, so that one day they can draw closer to that divine greatness. Continuous spiritual progress is the very essence of existence in paradise. It is not about eternal rest, but about an ongoing process of evolution, a quest for perfection, so that the soul, over time, becomes worthy of understanding and uniting with God. This realization profoundly transformed Arthur Jensen, who now saw paradise not as a place of escape, but as a field of infinite growth. Thus, he understood that the true spiritual mission is not merely to attain peace, but to constantly improve, to shape oneself to become, in a way, more like the divine. Arthur Jensen reflected deeply on the true essence of paradise. For him, this place was not simply a refuge of eternal pleasure, but a space dedicated to intense spiritual work that brings the soul closer to the Creator. As he himself stated, paradise is the joy of spiritual work that transforms a person, bringing them ever closer to God. Although throughout his life he had been hasty and rejected any notion of a higher power, his experience after death allowed him to perceive something fundamental. Deep down, everyone possesses an intrinsic perception of the existence of God. He observed that in moments of difficulty, when people face the abyss, it is common for them to pray regardless of their beliefs. No matter how much we deny the existence of God, Jensen would say, deep down, we know He exists. For him, God is not simply an abstract entity, but a combination of many forces and natural laws that govern the universe. Light, electricity, gravity, time, space, the infinite, and even life itself. Thus, God is everything that keeps the cosmos in motion and in harmony, an omnipresent presence that permeates everything. Arthur also learned that after death, not all souls reach that glorious space he called paradise. According to what was revealed to him, all beings in the afterlife receive a reward or punishment based on their true essence, that is, according to the vibrations they carry within their soul. In the spiritual universe, souls are classified according to their vibrations. High vibrational souls are those who, during their earthly lives, practiced goodness, were altruistic, and spiritually developed. In contrast, low vibrational souls belong to those who dedicated themselves solely to satisfying their selfish desires. In the other world, souls can only exist in the regions that correspond to their internal vibrations. The highest vibrations draw the soul toward paradise, while the lowest lead it to areas of suffering. Arthur Jensen then addressed the concept of hell, explaining that many people believe this place to be either eternally cold or filled with fiery flames. According to him, both are true. Hell is extremely cold, but not in a physical sense. This coldness is spiritual, caused by the low vibration of the souls residing there. These souls, immersed in feelings like hatred, greed, selfishness, and indifference, perceive the space around them as an icy void. However, what makes this experience even more torturous, according to Jensen, is that these souls, although they live in a state of profound cold and discomfort, still cling to material and selfish desires that can no longer be fulfilled. For in the other world, there is no more physical matter. These desires create an eternal flame of dissatisfaction within them, a metaphysical fire that, instead of providing warmth, only perpetuates the pain. Thus, these souls live a duality, cold on the outside and burning on the inside. But in the end, all around them is merely dense darkness. Jensen also learned that these souls need help, as they are unable to shake themselves free. That is why, from time to time, higher beings descend into these dark regions to guide those who are ready to repent and change. Those who accept this help have the chance to begin a spiritual ascent, thus towards the true paradise. During a conversation with other beings in the afterlife, Arthur Jensen realized that his mind was becoming increasingly clear. He finally understood the purpose of earthly life. It was at this moment that one of his interlocutors told him he had to return to Earth, a revelation that deeply unsettled him. Jensen did not want to leave this wonderful world, where he finally grasped everything with clarity. He begged to stay there, but the inhabitants of the other world were firm. They told him that he still had an important mission to fulfill on Earth. Many, in the near future, would need his spiritual guidance. Once his task was complete, he could return and remain forever in this celestial place. After these words, Arthur felt a tingling and compressing sensation. In an instant, he awoke in his physical body with a deep and transformed understanding. He now knew with certainty that the existence of the soul and life after death were not just abstract concepts, but tangible reality. As he himself stated, every being, even those who aggressively deny the spiritual world, deeply hopes, like everyone else, that life continues in one way or another after death. This led him to an ironic reflection on human behavior. Those who constantly insist they do not believe in another world paradoxically continue to be interested in it, reading books and watching movies about life after death. If they truly didn't believe, why would they be so interested in this topic? This incessant quest for answers, for Arthur Jensen, is a form of self-illusion, a reflection of the deep desire that each person carries for an afterlife beyond material existence. Vincent Hensley became another person who, after a near-death experience, visited the supernatural realm and returned with a profound spiritual mission. In 2011, at the age of 60, he experienced clinical death, which led him to a realm beyond physical life, heaven. His story begins on an apparently ordinary day, while he was working on his farm in the Swiss mountains. He was driving a tractor when an insect suddenly flew into his eye, causing a temporary loss of vision. This small incident had catastrophic consequences. Vincent lost control of the tractor, which was speeding toward a cliff. With no way to avoid the fall, he found himself forced to jump. But as he did, he was struck by a runaway car that dragged him along and knocked him unconscious. When Vincent finally regained consciousness, he was no longer in his physical body. He found himself in a place he immediately recognized as paradise. This place could be nothing else, he said, describing the heavenly surroundings in detail. After shaking off the initial surprise, Vincent began to notice extraordinary things around him. He saw figures that could not be described as human, yet somehow he felt he recognized them as loved ones, perhaps his parents, who seemed to be waiting for him. However, their faces were blurry, and he couldn't clearly identify them. Additionally, there were other beings made of pure light, whose presence radiated a sense of peace and harmony. But what impressed him the most was a phenomenon he described as higher powers, something descending from above towards him. Their force emanated immense power and indescribable wisdom. As they approached him, the atmosphere around him filled with a radiant golden light, a light that seemed imbued with pure and transcendent energy. The entities informed Vincent that he was indeed in paradise, but it was not his time to stay there. His mission was incomplete, and he had to return to Earth. What was even more surprising was the instruction Vincent received from his higher powers. He was to testify about his experience in paradise. How? Through words and painting. This troubled Vincent, as he had never been an artist and had no talent for painting. His life had always revolved around agricultural work, and the idea of creating art seemed distant and unattainable. However, one of the voices from the entities insisted. He had to start painting the visions he had experienced, the images of the other world, and show his representations to the world. Vincent, a puzzled father, had to accept what was asked of him. Heaven had entrusted him with a mission that he didn't fully understand, but it was deeply connected to his experience. He would return to his earthly life with a renewed purpose to communicate through art the beauty and depth of the other world. So, he began to paint. At first, his works were rudimentary, but quickly he refined his technique, using colors and shapes to represent what he had experienced during his journey in the supernatural realm. Vincent Hensley's experience not only marked his life, but also that of many others who discovered his work. His paintings, full of light and spirituality, became a form of testimony to the existence of another plane of reality, something he had never imagined he could describe or understand. In his journey back to the physical world, he brought with him a clear message. Life after death is not an abstract concept, but a reality that can be perceived by those who are willing to listen and perhaps even see. And for Vincent, his spiritual mission was just beginning. The mission Vincent Hensley received seemed impossible, especially for a simple farmer. Yet there was something almost sacred about this task. He knew that, despite his limitations and lack of artistic skills, he had to do everything in his power to accomplish it. However, he also recognized that the skills needed were beyond his control. The higher powers, sensing his anguish, reassured him and promised that once he returned to life, all conditions would be created to help him fulfill what had been asked of him. After accepting the mission, Vincent began his journey back to his physical body. But before returning to Earth, he was taken to several places in heaven. There, he had the opportunity to absorb the spiritual sensations and vibrations he would later need to convey through his art. These vibrations would be essential for him to share with the world the depth of what he had experienced in the other world. When he finally returned to his body, the process of recovery was truly torturous. The physical pain was intense, but what tormented him the most was the question of how he would accomplish his mission. And what will happen to me if I can't paint? He wondered. This doubt haunted him as he was recovering in the hospital, until one night, something extraordinary happened. Vincent felt an irresistible force within him, something beyond his understanding, that urged him to get out of bed and take a brush. Even without knowing how to use the paints, he got up and began to paint, guided by a force that seemed to emerge from a higher realm. All night long, he painted without stopping, until he was exhausted and laid back down. Vincent later reflected on this experience, saying, "These paintings were not mine. They were made by my hands, yes, but they were the superior forces of another space working through me." He began to understand that his mission was not just to paint canvases, but to be a channel between heaven and earth, a link that would convey the message of the other world through art. Over time, he accepted this new identity and the responsibility of transmitting the vibrations he had experienced in paradise. Now, Vincent was convinced of something deep and unchangeable. Life after death is a reality, regardless of each person's beliefs. For him, the spiritual experience and the mission he received were sufficient proof of this truth. He also learned that in our earthly lives, each of us has a unique mission, and that it is essential to fulfill it, as it directly determines what will happen to us after death. Vincent felt that by fulfilling his mission, he was helping others to prepare for life after death, something he believed was fundamental for all. Each of us has our own life task, he would say, and we must make every effort to accomplish it, as it directly affects what happens to us beyond the line of our mortal existence. This mission, which initially seemed impossible, transformed Vincent not only into an artist but also into a spiritual messenger, someone who had received a vision of the afterlife and the responsibility to share it with the world. His work, therefore, was not just art, but a way to communicate a universal truth. Life continues after death, and we all have a greater purpose that transcends our physical existence. Thank you for watching until the end, dear friends. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your interaction is very important to us. Have a great day.